I would just like to present our speaker. Our speaker is Dr. Cristina Banfi, and she is an expert in bilingualism. And the title of her presentation is Bilingualism, the Superpower of the Future. She has received a PhD in linguistics from the University College of London in 1999, right? And she currently serves as the advisor to the Ministry of Education in Buenos Aires and the Department of Educational Planning. And more importantly, as far as we're concerned, she has recently joined our club. So she's a member in the University Women's Club. And it's a great honor and a privilege. And we would always welcome her suggestions and ideas later on. But yeah, without further ado, I'll leave the floor to her and she can start her presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Mona, and thank you very much, Melody, for letting people in and helping me with all the technical side of things, and Litty as well, later on with the moderating. I'm going to start sharing. I'm using two screens today, so I'm a bit split between screens, so bear with me if I go slowly on some things, but so the idea today is, as Mona said, to talk about bilingualism, the superpower of the future. We'll see what that means. But first of all, let me see if this is working. Here we go. Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to do is thank you for inviting me, not only today, but the previous two sessions, so that I could get a hang of what these online luncheons were like. When I was told I was going to have lunch online, I thought, I'm going to be eating my computer. But I learned that the last two sessions were very enjoyable, and so I hope this one will be too. And thank you for also for inviting me to join the association. I must be one of the most recent members, so it's all new to me. So thank you. So the plan for today is to talk about different types of bilingualism, about the benefits of bilingualism, and about some implications for the future, as the title indicated. But I know that in this particular group, there's a lot of expertise and experience and life experience of bilingualism. So I thought that perhaps what we could do is a little bit of sharing of this experience. And to that effect, I prepared a little activity so that you can join me by telling me what your languages are. And what I've done, if I can open it, just give me a second, is I've put in the chat box, just a minute, the link that I'm sharing in this slide. You can use the QR code, but if that's too much of a mess, there should be possible to get, just let me, just 1 second, here we go. So in the chat, you have the link where you can just go in and write the languages you speak, and then we'll be talking about that later on in the session. Okay, so just a little activity while I share some ideas with you. Okay, so back to our presentation and to our topic for today. Bilingualism, as you're probably aware, is a fairly high-profile issue that appears regularly in newspapers, in reports, in journals, and people are quite interested in it, even if they don't have personal experience of it, and sometimes even more if they don't have personal experience of it. Sometimes they have some preconceptions about what being bilingual is, some prejudices, and we'll try to dispel some of these preconceptions and prejudices that people have. But before that, let me give you a little bit of background as to some facts in relation to languages in general that will help us put this notion of bilingualism in context. First of all, we live in a world of languages, and one of people's essential traits is being able to communicate in language. There are, as you may already know, about 7,000 languages in the world. And this is an infographic that shows language, the number of language speakers. And this presentation I will give you the link to, and you will have links within it to go and see the different texts and the different materials that I've included. Everything here has a link and can take you somewhere else. So as we can see, there are many more languages than, for example, countries. So 7,000 languages in about 190 countries that there are in the world. There must be more than one language per country, right? And therefore, there may be many languages that coexist in the same space. Some people were from the US in this meeting. I chose to show you a little bit about New York and about the languages that are spoken in different parts of New York. And a recent study reports that whereas most of the population speaks primarily English and Spanish in New York, almost 30% of the people who live there also speak other additional languages. So you can imagine that there's a large portion of the population that is bilingual or multilingual, okay? So this shouldn't surprise us. Also, there are some countries that have many, many more languages than we may think. And here's the list of countries with the most languages spoken. Top of the list is Papua New Guinea, which appears on most introductory linguistics books as being the country with more than 800 languages. But then we have countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, India, even the United States, China, Mexico and Cameroon and Australia, with many different languages spoken within their borders, okay? Now, in some of these countries, there are some very interesting cultural practices associated with multilingualism. And I chose one that I thought might be of interest because it's quite different from what perhaps we are used to. And it's a multilingual practice of the tribes of northern Brazil and Colombia, the Tucano tribes. It's a group of tribes. And in this part of the world, they practice linguistic exogamy, which means that the men of the tribe have to marry outside the tribe. So they have to marry somebody who is from another tribe and therefore speaks another language. Furthermore, they live in the longhouses. You have a picture there of one of the longhouses that they live in, where there are about 6 to 8 families to a longhouse. So while the men go out hunting, the women and the children exist in a very multilingual space and grow up speaking many different languages. This is quite extreme form of multilingualism compared to what we are used to, but to bring it back to perhaps modalities that we're more used to, we have here some data on the bilingual speakers in the European Union, where, for example, we find that there are more bilinguals than multilinguals. This is data from the European Commission, and you have the overall percentages, but also the most multilingual or bilingual countries within the European Union. The figures go down a little bit when we look at the US, but there are many other countries where multilingualism and bilingualism is the norm. In fact, the estimate as a whole in the world is that there are more bilinguals than monolinguals. As well, another aspect of bilingualism that we should consider, and we'll see what the differences are in a minute, is the skills in foreign language that people in different countries have developed. And there we have in yellow the number of people who speak one language, in blue the people who speak 2 languages, and orange, the people who speak 3 or more languages per country. And this reflects the data that we saw earlier on. But again, we can see that a large portion of the population speak more than one language in the data that we have in the European Union. Okay. Now, we know from the interest that bilingualism generates that it is an issue that has very clear implications, and that has been picked up as having clear implications. For example, excuse me, for economic growth, as the World Economic Forum has highlighted in this item of news. Excuse me. But there's also another aspect or another area that language and linguists are concerned with, which is the fact that this very multilingual world that we live in is also threatened by the fact that there are many of these languages that are spoken by very few people, and they're endangered and they're at risk of this disappearing. So the UNESCO has launched the Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger, which is the information you have on the left of your slide. And Google and other organizations have also launched an endangered languages project to draw attention to this problem, this increasing problem that we have. And an estimate from the 1990s, an Alaska linguist estimated that languages are disappearing at twice the rate as plants and animal species. So we hear a lot about plants and animals becoming extinct. Languages are disappearing at twice the rate of animals and plants. I'm going to play you just a 1-minute video to summarize the Endangered Languages Project so that you get an idea. Let's hope the technology helps us. Let's see how this goes. Okay. Hello. Let's see if it works. Okay. Okay, well, this was a good idea, and I tried this out. Just let me, of course, technology does as it pleases. Let me just check
the sound.
Screen 1, and let me make sure that this works. Just a second. Okay. Okay. Just a second. Wow. I would say talk amongst yourselves while I do this, but don't, because the system would probably collapse. Let me just try this again. Okay. Okay. Believe me, I did try this out yesterday and it worked, but I must have been sharing this in a different way when I was doing that. That's a shame. Just one more try. I can't make it work here. That's the problem. Okay. Okay, well, let's keep going and then we'll see if we can go back to it. Okay. So the idea is that when a language is lost, the cultural heritage of a population is lost, and that's something that we don't want to happen. Now, most of this points towards what we would call societal bilingualism. So societies where more than one language coexists, and where people may speak the different languages to different levels of proficiency. But go back to perhaps more basic aspects related to bilingualism. Let's try and define this term, right? Something that we always try to do when we talk about something. Basically, when we look at bilingualism, what we see is that there are as many definitions as people who have tried to work on the term and who have attempted a definition. And I'm going to show you some of them to show you the spectrum. Bloomfield talked about native-like control of two languages, but one cannot define a degree of perfection at which a foreign speaker becomes a bilingual. So you can see the problem already, right? Native-like, but we don't know how good is good enough. And on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, we have Weinreich in 1953, at the end of the slide. The practice of alternately using two languages will be called bilingualism, and the person involved bilingual. So this is a much broader definition, something much more general. In the middle, there are other considerations, such as when the languages were acquired, how they were acquired, how much the languages are used or not, etc., etc. But let's look at some of these issues. First of all, one issue is the distinction between childhood bilingualism and bilingualism developed later on. So for example, we look at babies who are born into families where two languages are spoken, and they grow up speaking what are effectively two first languages. Okay, this is what we call simultaneous bilingualism. Okay, so two languages developed at once. Another option of very early bilingualism is when a child grows up in a home where one language is spoken, but in the community, a different language is spoken. Okay, so they come into contact with that second language very early on, and crucially during what is known as the critical period for language acquisition, i.e. before they go to school. Later on, of course, children can also develop different levels of bilingualism through instruction, okay, once they go to school. What happens is slightly different, but similar levels of proficiency can be attained. Again,
Cristina, excuse
yes.
me, can you go to full screens?
I thought I was. I'm seeing it in full screen, but you are, okay. I see what's happening. Yeah, sorry. Let me share this properly. This happens because I'm trying to use too much technology. Yeah, good points. Okay, what is? Okay, let me try to do this. Here we go. Yeah, okay. That better? Yeah, sorry about that. Yes. Right, so we consider how linguists classify bilinguals, and I mentioned the question of age, and there's simultaneous bilinguals, and then there's sequential bilinguals. So one language is acquired and then another one. Or late bilinguals, people who develop bilingualism later on in life. And how late is too late is another interesting question. The ability achieved in the language, or the stages of development of that ability is another issue. So an incipient bilingual is somebody who is at the earlier stages of development. We also have what are known as receptive bilinguals, so people who understand but won't speak, won't produce. Those are called receptive bilinguals. Productive bilinguals are the counterpart of receptive bilinguals, those who understand and produce. And then another classification is minimal, maximal, or semilingual, which is a term that is a bit controversial, but it's left for people who have trouble in both their languages, okay? Balance between the languages in terms of use. A balanced bilingual is a kind of ideal that doesn't really exist, but that is a person who is perfectly balanced in their competence in their two languages and uses them perfectly competently in all domains of life. You can imagine why this is more difficult to attain, because there's usually some distinction between one language or the other. A functional bilingual is somebody who can function in certain circumstances, in certain contexts, but not beyond. And dominance is something that tends to happen with bilinguals. They may be dominant in one domain or another. Maybe at work, they're used to using one language, and at home, they're used to using another, and so on and so forth. Language development, this has to do with taking a photograph of the development of a speaker, and a language may be on the ascendant curve or recessive, maybe receding. And this happens sometimes when two languages compete with each other. So maybe that child who grew up in a home where a language was spoken and then goes to school and a different language is spoken, and that language kind of takes over. There's an issue there, depending on the type of education and the type of context and the relationships between the two languages, how the languages relate to one another. The context of language acquisition, if the acquisition happens naturally in the home, spontaneously, this happens in early childhood for the most part, or if it's in an instructed environment, okay? Sometimes acquisition may happen naturally as well in the context of, for example, immigrants or refugees who don't necessarily take classes to learn a language, but pick up bits of the language as they go along. And then, as I mentioned, the domains of language use may be different, and people will have different levels of command of their languages in these different domains. And there are just some examples: homework, society, school, college, whatever. And finally, the reasons why a person is bilingual. Is there a choice involved, or is that something that happens to you because of the circumstances you grew in? Is it circumstantial? Is it something that in a certain situation you're thrown into another language and you have to deal with it? Or is it something that is more of a plan, part of your life plan? In relation to this, there's some very interesting work that people like Patricia Cull have done in the lab that she runs in the States, where she has looked at the very early possibilities that children have to discriminate sounds. She proposes, and there's a language, there's a TED talk that you can listen to that where she presents her studies, where she tells us that children are universal learners. They're born capable of producing and discriminating any sound in any language. But soon after, and how soon, we're talking about how soon, they stop being able to discriminate certain sounds. And the experiment that is shown in the picture is one where that little baby is shown, or is actually exposed to, two sounds that her parents are not able to discriminate because they don't exist in their language, and the baby is able to discriminate them before the age of 1. But after the age of 1, they stop being able to tell the difference between these two sounds. And so this is an aspect of this critical period for language acquisition that I was telling you about, which is phonological discrimination, being able to discriminate the sounds of different languages, and therefore possibly being able to produce them, or if not, being able to produce them, having to learn them in a different way when we are older. Doesn't mean we can't, it just means that we learn them differently when we're older than when we do when we're very young. This goes to the intuition that babies are natural language learners, and that babies are sponges, as people say. They're not sponges, they're babies, but they have a greater facility to tell apart these sounds that become more difficult for us when we grow older. So one of the key issues when thinking about bilinguals is what is this expected outcome, right? Because I talked about things being on the ascendant, receding, but what is it to be a bilingual, and how do we assess what a bilingual may be, or what bilingual proficiency may be like? And do we look at the process? Do we look at the outcome? Do we look at both? And we're probably all quite familiar with some measures of proficiency that exist for different languages, right? For example, the Common European Framework for Languages, as proposed by the Council of Europe, gives us different levels that people can attain in their language development, right? And they are used in examinations and in certificates that people sit for as part of their education, typically. But typically, they're not bilingual measures. They're monolingual measures. Each language is measured separately. And we'll see that that has some implications and some contradictions with what we know to be the case in bilingual minds, okay? Another issue is, are we bilingual because we consider ourselves to be bilingual, or are we bilingual because other people consider us bilingual? And this has to do with identifying as bilingual. This is a term that has become quite extended in the use of, with reference to ethnicity, for example, right? Where people self-identify. Well, bilingualism has some similar issues. And again, the Council of Europe and the Common European Framework has provided other instruments to take into consideration the experiences that people have with languages that don't necessarily get taken into account when we do a language test. They have produced instruments like passports, biographies, portfolios that capture this experience that people have with languages that are not necessarily captured in a test. So for example, if you had a grandmother who sang lullabies to you in a given language that is not the language you speak today, that can be captured in these instruments. If you were exposed to a language because when you were very young, you traveled to another country with your parents and you went for, I don't know, 6 months to a local kindergarten, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an expert in that language. You probably can't speak it fluently, but you usually have some elements of that language. And writing a language biography and being able to capture this information is very enriching for people, because they usually dig up experiences about languages and awareness of language acquisition that they had completely forgotten about. I use this with some of my students, and I ask them to reflect on their language learning. And one of them, for example, this year in a postgraduate course, she told me that when she was little, her grandmother and her mother used to speak Armenian and Turkish so that she wouldn't understand, so that her and her sister wouldn't understand. But then when she was older, she went to visit Turkey on a tour, and she realized after a few days there that she could understand some things that people were saying, and she could even interact with them a little bit. Okay, so these experiences are there, and these experiences are interesting to explore in the experience of bilinguals. And this is why, and let's see if this works, I asked you to fill out the word cloud. Let's see if we can see it. Oh, very wonderful. There it is. Here we go. I'm going to share it with you. This is what you collectively have said about your languages. Can you see it? I've made it a bit bigger. Can you see the word cloud? Let me just try again. Yeah. Ah, there. Is it there now? Now you see that some languages appear much bigger because they are the languages that you all share. So English, Spanish, and French are languages that were repeated several times. But then we have other languages with different levels of proficiency that appear there. Very interesting. There's Armenian I just mentioned, Arabic, okay, and some expressions in different languages. Swiss German and German, French, okay, Portuguese, Russian, right. So you can see that collectively we have a lot of different languages that we may or may not have been aware of, okay? Let me just go back to the presentation. Here we go. I'll put this on the presentation later on so that you can see it. Okay, just a sec. So, screen sharing has stopped. Okay, there, share my screen. Right, so here we go. Right, so this is what one of the students I was telling you about told me about her experience doing her biography. This is a revised and extended version of my autobiography. I have included much of what we discussed in class directly or implicitly. The main thing for me is that I have reached memories I wouldn't have remembered without having attended this course. I was surprised to discover how many aspects of my life are related to language while writing it, since at first I thought it would be a boring biography. So it's nothing better than a student telling you that what they thought would be a boring task has become a good task. Right, so I was saying that there was a problem with these certificates being monolingual and discrete about languages. And this is because languages interact within bilinguals. They're not, we used to, or people used to think, and people have the prejudice or the idea, the wrong idea, that the two languages that a bilingual speak are separate and discrete and don't interact, and that, you know, we can split ourselves between these different languages. And this is something that Jim Cummings has disputed and has shown to be wrong. And he uses the metaphor of an iceberg. It's a bit of a complicated iceberg, but basically what he says is that the two tips of the iceberg are the visible languages, the L1 and the L2. And there's much more below the surface that we don't see when we see the two languages that a speaker has. And that there's much that is shared between those two languages. So there are certain aspects of the two languages that are invisible, that are individual to the two languages. But there's also this general cognitive academic language proficiency, which languages share and which enable us with relative ease to go on learning other languages, okay? I won't go into this into too much detail because, you know, I could teach a whole course about it, but the metaphor of the iceberg is useful to remember. The languages are two separate peaks, and there's much more below the surface, and there's a lot that is common to the different languages. Now, of course, many people's iceberg look more like this, with several different peaks, as you showed in your summary of languages. And the peaks are crucially different. Perhaps one language we are used to only speaking and we don't write in it. Perhaps another language we learned as children and we don't use it so much now. Perhaps another language is one that we use to read literature because we like literature in that particular language. And that means that the two languages are never exactly, or the two or the three or the four languages are never exactly the same. And that goes to one of the questions I was sent in terms of interaction between the different languages. Once one starts learning a third language, sometimes the second language interferes or affects the third language rather than the first language that we think would be affecting it. And we don't talk about interference so much, we talk about transfer. We're constantly transferring from what we know into what we expect to know. And a lot of the time we're right. A lot of the time we make good guesses. And that's the positive transfer. And that helps us when we're learning a new language. But sometimes there is some negative transfer where we make mistakes because we think things will be a certain way and they actually work a different way. I included there some examples with words that are similar across different languages, but this happens with grammatical structures, this happens with pronunciation, this happens in many areas. Sometimes there are negative transfers, sometimes there are positive transfers, but for the most part they are positive, as the little picture indicates. As if this were not enough, one more layer of complexity is that people are typically not only bilingual, but often they are, and we strive to help them become biliterate. So be literate in both their languages or in all their languages. And there's another layer which can sometimes be even more difficult, which is that of being bicultural. Learning a language is learning a culture, but then there are many cultures. There are many cultures within one language. There are many cultures within one city, and this is quite complicated. So people will develop bicultural skills in the cultures that they need and that they use, but not in all of them. Even if you're a very proficient English language speaker, even if you're a monolingual English language speaker and you go to another country where English is spoken, you will need to adjust culturally to that other culture. And I included a little example. You may have seen this film, Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a very good, and there's the reference to being a spy. The actor there was an American soldier playing a spy. And if you haven't seen the film, I'll give it away a little bit, but he is discovered because instead of saying three like this, he says three like this. Now, he was a very proficient German speaker because his parents were German and he was brought up speaking German. But this distinction, which was a cultural distinction, was what gave him away. So he wasn't the perfect spy because he wasn't bicultural with the group that he was interacting with. So that's another issue to consider. Now, going back to what I was saying in terms of motivations, there's the reasons why people develop bilingualism or don't develop bilingualism or have possibilities of developing bilingualism. As I said, it may be something that happens to you. It may be that you grow up in a bilingual family. Ophole is a method that is used in some bilingual families where one parent speaks one language and the other parent speaks another language. The other option is the home language versus the community language. Increasingly, children are learning languages very, very early on in instructed environments. So children go to school at the age of 2 when they haven't necessarily concluded their acquisition of their first language, and they start learning a second language. So that is somewhere in between natural and instructed, if you like. The families that move around the world also are exposed to several languages. minorities, deaf people are also exposed to different languages depending on the context. It may be something you choose, and I chose the example of heritage languages here because sometimes people choose to revive or remember or study anew a language that is the language of their ancestors. My mother started learning Catalan when she was retired because part of her family was from Catalonia and she wanted to remember what her uncles used to speak like, right? And that's your heritage language, right? It may be something you work on in formal education or through independent learning. And here comes the why bother, and we're getting closer to the benefits. You may do it for study reasons. It may improve your chances in terms of work. It may be related to your identity and who you are. It may be something you do for fun. It may be something you do to have access to a broader community, to literature, to culture. And what we notice with these different benefits that bilingualism has and presents to people is that the balance has changed a little bit in terms of what, which of these benefits have become more important to people. Let's see, hopefully this video will work. No, it's definitely not working. Yeah, okay. Okay, there's a little video that I wanted you to see there of a translation device, okay? Now we have translation devices, and the day before yesterday, I read a review in The Guardian about iPods, like the ones I'm using, buds, like the ones I'm using, that will help you listen to somebody in a language and hear them in a different language. So somebody who speaks to you in Korean, you don't speak Korean, the buds will translate for you. And you'll be able to speak, and your phone will speak to them in their language. Now, this is technology affecting the way we deal with languages, right? This is what Yuval Noah Harari, if you've read his work at all, talks about when he refers to the augmentation revolution. He talks about the fact that we are now at a stage where technology is allowing us to develop our skills in a way that we couldn't before, right? And this is a crucial example. At the moment, we're using buds. Maybe in the future, we'll have an implant. Who knows, right? And this will solve certain transactional problems. So if I go on holiday somewhere to a country where I don't speak the language, I won't be completely lost because I will have this possibility, right? Here's some more of his work in relation to the future, particularly Homo Deus talks about the history of the future, a very interesting and a bit scary view of what things are to come, right? So that brings up the question of what is the point of bilinguals, right? Because if you have buds that will help you with these languages, and we already have Google Translate, show of hands, who uses Google Translate? I do, right? Yeah, okay, we all do. And if we have the buds, we'll use the buds. And then put differently, how are the skills of bilinguals important for the future? This is what I want to concentrate on for the last bit of the presentation. And this is where I bring in the Captain Bilingual. That's Wonder Woman. But anyway, I turned her into Captain Bilingual, but I was anticipating something that Marvel already did. Maybe you're not familiar with Spider-Girl, but Spider-Girl is a new character that Marvel have created, and she's an immigrant from Mexico. She lives in New York, and she, on top of being an excellent superhero, of course, Anya has kept up her gymnastics, is bilingual in Spanish and English, and is a skilled computer hacker. So she's female, she's an immigrant, she's bilingual, and she's a computer hacker, a girl of the future, clearly, right? I'm being facetious, but what I'm pointing at is that people like Marvel know where trends are going, and that's why they're picking up on this character. Again, here's a little video that I won't be able to play for some reason, but you can watch later on the benefits of bilingual brains. And specifically, here are some of the benefits that I think will matter, even if we can use buds to communicate on holidays. One of the key areas of research in bilingualism in recent years has been the neurological implications of being bilingual. And here's a little list of some of the main benefits that bilingualism is supposed to give to bilingual brains. It says preventing dementia, it's delaying the onset of dementia, more precisely. So it doesn't prevent it altogether, but it delays the onset. I'll talk to that about a bit more in a minute. Bilingual brains have been shown to focus better on tasks and are better at switching between tasks, multitasking. I don't know if any of you do that. Probably you do. The gray matter, the physical brains, the physical characteristics of bilingual brains are different from the brains of monolinguals. Bilinguals are supposed to have improved memory and improved decision-making skills. Okay, so if nothing else, bilinguals have 2.0 brains, right? And this is good for bilinguals, but maybe good for others too. And let's see what I mean. This is Dr. Ellen Bialystok, and she's done some of the work in her lab related to delaying the onset of dementia. She has a wonderful talk there that you can watch. And this is the sort of work that they do in imaging the brain and seeing what areas of the brain are active in bilinguals and in monolinguals. I'm not going to go into the details. But the wider implications of this has to do with the world of work and the world of jobs and the world of the future. A lot of concern about what the future of work brings, as you can see in these newspaper articles in different contexts. And a lot of what they say is that machines are going to take over a lot of jobs. Okay, this is a trend that has started and is set to continue. But the interesting thing for us to look at is what goes together with that. What will be the most needed skills in the future? And as you can see, there's a comparison here between 2015 and 2020. And what this shows is that the skills of bilinguals are on the ascendant in terms of what will be needed. So complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, communication skills in general are all elements that are going to be greatly valued in the world of work in the future. And these are skills that bilinguals have, right? So this is why I was making that connection. And the next connection is with the area that I've worked in, which is in education, and when we compare what the skills that education prepared us for in the 19th and 20th century, we used to talk about the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And now people talk about the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. So again, these are areas where bilinguals are strong compared to monolinguals, and therefore will have an advantage over monolinguals. And in this sense, and I'll just run you by a little bit of work that I've done recently in terms of communication and in terms of working with education and languages, I've been looking at how different groups of people work towards producing different innovation projects in languages. When we think about innovation projects in languages, we think we need teachers, we need head teachers, we need schools, we need experts, we need curricula, we need ministries of education, we need examination boards, we need materials writers, we need publishers, we need the academy, we need to train teachers, we need associations of teachers, we need governments, we need politicians, we need ideologies, we need the media, we need students, and we need families. All those ingredients go into generating innovation in language learning projects. So you can see how communication and helping people work with each other are very important in these projects as well. And in these contexts, the things that we need are linguistic policies that will help people develop bilingual skills. We need a research agenda on languages and language learning, and this is something we don't have, unfortunately. And we need education for language professionals. We need more people working in languages and working with languages. Because if not, these things will be left in the hands of algorithms, which would not be a good idea. These are some of the things I've been working on in recent years in relation to this. And here are a few things to remember as I think we're coming to a close of our time. Bilinguals experience instances of positive and negative transfer between their languages. Attitudes towards languages and towards bilingual influence the outcome of bilingualism. The incorporation of languages increases executive functions and decision-making abilities. A language, even a first language, can be lost or forgotten if it's not used, and a bilingual can, given certain circumstances, become monolingual. Parents who want their children to retain their heritage language must work at it. Bilinguals have to work at it to remain bilingual and benefit from being bilingual. So these are just some thoughts to leave you with. I have a little poem to show you, but I'll show it after the question periods. I'll just leave you this final thought now. This is something, and social networks pervade us, apparently. Somebody reminded me on Facebook that I wrote this and I'd forgotten. So the bit about good memory of bilinguals, maybe we need to take a rain check on that. I translated it for us here. What I said back in 2015 was, language cuts across us from when we are born and even before until we cease to exist, from the moment we wake up until we go to sleep, and even in our dreams. It is an essential component of our development as people, of the communities we live in, and the institutions in which we participate. It allows us to access knowledge, establish relationships with people, talk about objects and imaginary situations, make transactions, work and create, in brief, do everything that makes us human. For this reason, studying language and languages allows us to better know ourselves and the world around us. So that's the final thought. And these are my bilingual past and future. On the left, you have my kids who are bilingual, simultaneous bilinguals in English and Spanish. And on the right, you have my father and my two uncles who were bilingual in Italian and Spanish. So we continue with the tradition with different languages and in different contexts, but it's something that cuts across the generations. I've included some references, and that's thank you for me. Hopefully I've made it to the right time. I'll stop sharing now and I'll see if there are any questions or comments or objections. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. We're moving on to the questions period, but I wanted to thank you for a very, very interesting and extremely informative presentation. Food for thought in bucketfuls, really. I remember
I tend to be a bit excessive. I'm sorry about that. I keep adding things I want to say.
No, that's
well, it was an excellent use of your time. It was really, really very comprehensive and varied and deep. And well, the last slides were particularly moving. Thank you. I remember the last time we spoke, the last time we met, this was before the world almost came to an end, which is more or less happening now, that you told me that you had started a blog, or that you were about to start a blog. I checked on it and saw how much it had developed since its inception. And I wanted to ask you, in particular, who do you think you're serving with that blog in terms of what are the concerns, if any, of parents regarding the upbringing of their children in a bilingual context? We know of all the benefits, most parents know about that, and they're aspiring to a good education for their children, but they have concerns. What do you think they are, and how do you address them?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. It's in fact slightly paused because of the world coming to an end and how much work I've had since. I've been working 15 hours since March, so 15 hours a day. Yes, the blog started a little bit as a collection of responses to questions I've been receiving over the years. Pretty much everyone I know anywhere whenever they notice something, or that I work on bilingualism, or that my kids are bilingual, or whatever it is, people always have questions. People always have questions about what is good, bad, whether you should do this or that, whether it will hurt them or damage them in any way to be exposed to more than one language when they're little, whether they should make sure that they take them to classes for babies, which not necessary, but you know, various concerns that people have voiced over the years. And some have been in person, some have been in writing. And so I'd started writing and collecting some of these materials. And at one point, I was receiving several queries a day. And I thought, hang on a second, rather than reply, you know, one by one and have this collection of material that nobody else sees, I'll put it together in some form that can be publicly accessible and that people can have a look at. And so a lot of the questions I try to answer in the blog are practical issues as to, you know, what can I do? How can I, you know, I worry that my child is the doctor told me that my child is going to be confused, that I shouldn't speak to him in my language because he's going to be confused. And I tend to tell them the anecdote that I had when I went to the doctor with my daughter. She was a week old, and the doctor, who's a wonderful doctor, she's great, she said, oh, you're going to speak English to your child? And I said, yes. And she's like, well, I think it would be better if your husband, who's English, speaks English to her and you speak Spanish to her. And I didn't put it this way, but I said, maybe you should take care of vaccines and I take care of this. Because you know, but most people will be very intimidated by the authority of a doctor who says something like that, or somebody in a position of power who says something like that. Particularly when the language is English, everybody in my daughter's kindergarten would go to their children, go and talk to Annabelle, she'll teach you English. Annabelle was 3 and she wasn't into teaching anybody anything, right? But the parents thought that it would be wonderful if they mixed with her because she spoke English. Now, there was another kid in her class who spoke Guarani at home, and they didn't do the same thing with Guarani, right? Now, this is why I was emphasizing the cognitive benefits of bilingualism, because the cognitive benefits of bilingualism are the same whether you speak Guarani or Warlpiri or High German or Italian, right? It's 2 languages at work that help you have these extra skills. And there's more to it, because if you come from a Guarani, and I had this year I had 2 students at university whose parents or grandparents speak indigenous languages, and they became more aware of this as a consequence of attending the course. And it's very interesting because they started asking their parents, they started asking their grandparents, they started wanting to learn. And, you know, it is part, and they said it's relearning who I am and relearning who what my roots are, and reflecting on it. So I think that's a bonus. The blog is in English and in Spanish. I made it bilingual because there's a lot of material on bilingualism in English on the internet, but there's relatively little in Spanish. I wish it could be translated into other languages, but it's an interesting area for lots of people to explore and to think about, the fact that it's possible, that it's not something that it's something that you need to work at. It's not something that is just unattainable or only possible if you have the resources to pay for very expensive tutoring. Okay.
Thank you. Before your talk, I remember that Shake sent in a question, and I see her hand is raised at the moment. Shake, would you like to phrase your question? Should she be unmuted, Melody? Or does she do it herself? Sorry, we can't, I can't hear you, at least. No, I can't hear you.
Yeah. Shake, you need to unmute yourself.
There, I got it. I'm much better at languages than at computing. Sorry. No, I was putting my hand up because I couldn't enter the languages thing, to how many languages you speak. But let me tell you a little anecdote before I ask my question, which I sent before, actually. When I was like in Romania, where I was born, when I was like 4 or 5, I believe, because we left after that because of the war, I consider myself very lucky because I had many reasons to learn another language. One was family. Another was we were in a different country from my family background. Another was we had to leave it and come to South America. So all this made me know several languages. And when I was that age, very young, my parents talked about Mr. whatever in Romania, Minescu, who had passed away. So they said it in Armenian. And I cried. I didn't want anybody to die. Nobody had to drop dead. No. So they said, well, no, let's modify this thing. If we have to talk about dying, let's say it in Turkish. So they started saying in Turkish. I didn't cry the first time. I didn't cry the second time. I realized what was going on. To this day, I know how to say he died in Turkish. Öldü. And I cried all the same. So when you said that children learn very quickly or something like that, it was my concern is about pronunciation. I don't know, and maybe you can help me. What are the abilities that a person has to have to pronounce? Some people pronounce well, other people not so well. Other people not so well. So what abilities do you have to have? Is it your ear, your hearing? Is it something else?
Well, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of ability and experience and predisposition and motivation. But it's a similar answer to what I would answer if you asked me how come some people can sing very well and other people can't, right?
Yeah.
You know, some people are fabulous at accents. Some people are fabulous at putting on accents, right?
Yeah.
And imitating other people. Other people are good at picking up an accent when they go on holiday, but they can't do it on purpose, right? Meryl Streep, she's fabulous when she acts. Yeah, she puts on these different, she trains a lot. There are people who are accent coaches. for actors in particular.
Yes.
But you have
Yes.
to remember that she does it in a film, in things that are memorized, where they can stop and go back and, you know, do another take, and you know, it's not real life, really, right? The thing is that this is what Patricia Cull, and it was because of your question that I included that slide, actually, because she works specifically showing that if there's one aspect of bilingualism that is difficult to attain after an early childhood, it's pronunciation. It's not impossible to attain it in terms of being comprehensible. It's not impossible to attain it in terms of being understood. But then, and there comes the question of being the spy. Do we need to be a spy? Do we need to pass ourselves as somebody we're not? Or is that part of who we are? You know, do we need to change our accent to fit which accent? That's another discussion, right? And I have it all the time with my students at university who spend a lot of time taking phonetics classes where they train and train and train. Did you see Othello on television last night? No, I didn't. I was out. And it's like, okay, how much do you think that memorizing these dialogues is going to help you with real life language? A little, but not a lot, you know. And then when are you going to talk about Othello on television last night? And, you know, right? Maybe your time would be better spent, I don't know, learning another language, and maybe that other language will help you with those sounds. I don't.
I'm conscious of the time, and we have a few more participants eager to ask questions. We have Barbara, whose hand is raised as well. If I see, is that right, Barbara?
Yes. Yeah. I unmuted myself. Yes, Dr. Banfi, this was a very impressive talk. Thank you very much. I had tons of questions or comments, and you have illuminated me also a great deal. I'm sort of in a sequence to what Jacquet asked you. In my, you know, Swiss upbringing, there was always a very strict conceptual division at school between native tongue and Fremdsprache, foreign language. And none of us, after, you know, 6 years of high school French, would consider ourselves a bilingual, not even after having gone to the obligatory séjour in France in order to acquire or perfect our Parisian pronunciation. Because in my home canton, that was a very big deal, not to speak the français fédéral, but to speak avec un accent parisien pratiquement parfait, because we didn't want to be recognized as les petits Suisses in France, and so forth. And it was the Italian of Siena, and it was the British Oxford accent, which totally got wiped out once I hit the United States. You know, it was... but so what I'm saying is, in the beginning of your talk, I was wondering to what extent in linguistics you distinguish between a foreign language and a bilingual capacity. We were taught that we could achieve at most being near native.
Well, there's all that story that you presented is very clear in exemplifying the hierarchies and the ways in which different varieties of languages are in different power hierarchies with each other. When you hit the States, corruption set in and your English got completely destroyed, obviously. Yeah, but on the other hand, it's the language of power and it's the language of the world, right? So those decisions are made in educational settings, and they're made to the extent that they follow different traditions, okay? It used to be very clear to separate the bilingual from the foreign language learner, right? it used to be much clearer. The child who grew up with 2 languages was bilingual. The person who learned French in high school was a foreign language learner, and you could tell. You could tell from the way they spoke. But then there started being some cases where a little bit more of a gray area, because there was the bilingual who had forgotten, and there was the foreign language speaker who got much, much better. And what about the foreign language speaker who went to live in Paris and you know, started speaking more French than Swiss German, and began to forget the Swiss German? Are you going to call that person a foreign language learner of French? Maybe not. But what happens is that along the way, there's so many variables that interfere or that interact to affect. That's why I was talking about the process or the outcome. You can take these photographs of people and assign different characteristics. And there are even neurological implications. And the foreign language learner, or the person who acquired or started learning a language after the plasticity was lost in the brain, is supposed to have a slightly different neurological reflection of those languages. But there's so much we don't know, and there's so many more. There's, for example, exceptional language learners, people who learn many languages to a very high level of proficiency. They have to have had the right circumstances to be able to do that, right? But it's what about all these children who are going to preschool and learning a language at the age of 2, starting to learn a language at the age of 2? Is it the same? How different is it from the child who spoke a language at home and then spoke another language in the community? The lines are becoming much more blurred, and the exposure, technology. My kids play and interact with their friends in the States and from other countries on their devices every day. So they're speaking different languages and different mixes of languages all the time. And that will change the way in which we deal with languages. That will change our views of what is a bilingual and what is I go back to the idea of the iceberg, and the idea that, you know, once another language appears, it will influence the first one as well. Have you ever caught yourselves saying something in your first language that came from your second language, and you go, ooh, that's wrong, and you said it, right? And it's transfer. It's natural for it to happen. We keep it in check because if we work, you know, in one language or in the other, if we interact with monolinguals, we keep it in check. But it happens all the time. It's always there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cristina, and Barbara, for your question. I see from the questions that language learning and language acquisition are so close to our own histories and so close to our heart and to our feelings. I think you dwelt on that a little, Cristina. And I think we have time to squeeze just one more question. I think Eliana had raised a hand. I don't see her,
I'm
photo,
here.
but...
If not, I have...
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, how are you, Cristina? Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. I have 2 short questions. One of them you have like answered in a way with the previous question, so I would make it very short. The first one is about if you have any way to measure the influence of the formal learning and the informal learning. You know, what you said before, I have a child that is going to a bilingual school since 2, but I think that he's more influenced by movies. I made him always watch cartoons in English and films and games, etc. And I can see in little children that they incorporate a lot of expressions, even this kind of biculturalism, through informal learning more than sometimes the formal school learning. So is there a way to measure this? And the second question, very short, is, I think, of course, you're talking about natural languages, but is it any study or thought about how other languages like coding language or programming languages that nowadays is mixed with English generally are mixing or blending with natural languages, or if people will be bilingual in a natural or in a technological language in a way?
Okay. Well, let me take the second one first. And I follow Chomsky in believing that natural languages are the creation of the human brain, and that machines can emulate what we do with our brains, which is pretty fantastic. But the languages that we create as humans, artificial languages, whether they're coding or things like Esperanto, they don't catch on because they're not natural languages. And there's something that we haven't yet discovered about how languages work to be able to invent them in that way. As to the informal nature of learning languages, I think it's having an increasing influence. My kids never knew the voices of the Simpsons in Spanish until they went to their friends' houses, because they used to watch the Simpsons in English, the Simpsons and all the other cartoons, right? Yes. So there's certain cultural artifacts that they will come into contact in the given language. My son used to go to watch, I don't know, films at the cinema at midnight with my husband because he wanted to watch the version in English, and he couldn't read subtitles. That was also partly why he wanted to watch the version in English. And it was a subtitled version of, I don't know, Batman Returns or something like that. So he'd go, you know, with all the grown-ups, and he was a little 6-year-old or something. So that, and increasingly the interaction. Another study that Patricia Carr has that is very interesting, she compares children who are exposed to Chinese lessons with a person and to Chinese through a screen. And the lessons with the person work, the screen doesn't. It's for phonological discrimination again, but it shows the importance of interacting with people in order to build a language, okay? Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't have exposure. Exposure is very helpful and it's very necessary, because if you don't have sufficient exposure, it's very difficult to develop a language. And that's where semilingualism comes in, where people have some elements of the language, but they don't have enough to express themselves. And perhaps exposure in our day was reading. I used to read a lot in English, in French. Whenever I started learning a language, I would read, right? Now I listen to podcasts. Especially now, I'm cooking, I'm washing, I'm doing things that I don't normally do, that I don't like. So I put these in and I listen to podcasts in Italian. My Italian is kind of intermediate, but you know, that about topics I know and I can follow them. And I don't have the time to sit down with a book because I'm washing or cooking or whatever, right? So it's exposure, it's crucial exposure. And through that, I learn, combined with, I don't know, sending messages to my Italian relatives, combined with occasionally coming into contact with the language in a different format. So yeah, I think these things, the balance between natural and instructed is going to change. And it's good that we are able to do that. I remember the days when we had to bring the video cassettes, right? And that was the way in which we could access, or the cassette. My kids don't even know what a cassette is. They look at it like this, right? But now we can have access to it at the tip of our fingers, and the possibilities are there. Litty, I have managed to find one of the videos. It's a 1-minute poem. If you want, I can close with that if there are no more questions. It's very short, I promise. 1 minute.
That's great, Cristina.
Yes, please. Yes.
And I'm sorry if there were any more questions that we can't address.
I can answer them later, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. I'll just play this because I think it's a nice. Ah, you can't hear it, can you?
No, no.
Hang on.
Um,
No, it's not playing.
You
Oh
can
dear.
put share audio when you share the video.
I have to share audio when I share the video. How about I send you the link? Let me see. Share audio.
It's maybe the
Doesn't
computer
it-
audio.
Audio settings. Yes. Wait a sec. Wait a
Yes.
sec. Wait a sec.
mhm.
It's not going to beat me. It's not going to
Or
beat
you
me.
can send us
Share
the link
audio.
for later, Cristina.
What's that?
If you want to send us the link, if this can't be played now, we can then
Yeah,
follow.
definitely. I'll just try one more time and see what happens. No, doesn't want to. Well, okay. There we go. I'll send the link. Here goes the link. There you go. It's a bilingual poem. It's called Bilingual Bilingue, and it's blends Spanish and English from the point of view of a bilingual child whose father wanted her to keep the languages separate, and she says she can't separate the two languages. Okay, so I'll stop sharing, but you've got the link in the chat, so you can
Thank
watch
you so
the
much, Cristina. Thank you. I'm sure there will be more questions that you're very kindly going to.
No problem.
We could send you questions. I think now Mona would like to say a few closing words.
Yes. First, I was just, before I thank you, maybe if you can send the links to Litty in an email or myself, and then we can also put them on the website when we put up the recording so people can.
Absolutely. I'll check that all the
access
links,
them.
because I think that somehow when I transferred to this computer where I am, some of the links vanished. And so that's why I couldn't play them. But I'll make sure they're all there, and I'll put the presentation up, and I'll send you the link so you can have access to everything.
Okay.
Would you like me to try to share the video? I think that I'm a co-host.
That would be great.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
open it.
Yeah.
It's only 1:30.
I cannot share. I'm not a co-host. I thought that I was a co-host, but
Yeah, you are a
I
co-host.
have the video open. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see.
Wait a minute.
My father liked them separate. One there, one here. Allá y aquí.
Can you listen?
As if aware that words might cut into his daughter's heart, el corazón, and lock the alien part to what he was, his memory, his name, su nombre, with a key he could not claim. English outside this door, Spanish inside, he said, y basta. But who can divide the world, the word mundo y palabra, from any child? I knew how to be dumb and stubborn, testaruda. Late, in bed, I hoarded secret syllables I read until my tongue, mi lengua, learned to run where his stumbled. And still the heart was one. I like to think he knew that, even when proud, orgulloso of his daughter's pen. He stood outside mis versos, half in fear of words he loved but wanted not to hear.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Eliana.
No, that's okay.
Thank you, Liana.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Banfi. This was great, and it's obvious by how many questions people wanted to ask. I'm even sort of wondering how we can send you questions, or maybe have another Q&A session at another time.
Sure.
Because obviously, you know, there are lots of, I have other questions as well. But yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have time for more, but thank you very much. It was super interesting. And
Glad.
please go ahead and send us the other links as well. We can put them on the website for people to look at their leisure. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for becoming a member as well. We're hoping to welcome more of your ideas and your knowledge. So I don't know, maybe we can have unmute our microphones and give a collective clap. And two, please.
Very, very nice.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Very good.
Right.
Yeah. So just I think now because
bilingual
we're
child.
pardon.
Okay.
Ah, okay.
Not a bilingual child speaking somewhere.
Oh, can't hear it.
Thank you.
I unmuted myself by mistake.
Okay.
I was just going to say about the automated translations like Google Translate. And when I first moved to Argentina, I downloaded a translation app. But of course, it translated Spanish or Mexican Spanish, but it didn't have Argentinian Spanish. So they always have their limitations, unfortunately. Also, as an Arabic speaker, we have many, many dialects. So like when I communicate with my friends on Facebook, I'm writing in my Egyptian dialect. So I always wonder what my friends who try and see the translation, what is going to turn up, because a lot of the words I'm using don't exist in standard Arabic. They're colloquial words. So.
Or they could mean something else entirely.
Yes, yes.
That's worse.
Yeah. So, okay, I know that some people have to go, so I'm just gonna start the club business part of our meeting, if that's okay. So we are starting the meeting at 2 minutes, 2 o'clock, 4 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and keep this short because I know people have to go. But I would just like to first ask for approval for the previous luncheon minutes. Anyone would like to motion the approval? Okay. Kathleen?
Mona, could you repeat whoever does the approval and the motion so that I get everything down for the minutes, please?
So Kathleen, I think, motion to approve, right?
Right, Kathleen Hall.
Kathleen Hall. And who seconds?
I do.
Okay, Barbara seconds. Okay. And I'm just going to make very brief announcements about upcoming activities. Phyllis is having a study group on Thursday, and the title is Building a Different Future, Conscious Capitalism and Repurposing Globalization. And next month, we're having, our speaker is Paul Pressy from the World Bank, and he will be talking about the evolution of the World Bank and how it's supporting countries in the COVID-19 pandemic. He's going to have like a short presentation and then a discussion, much like Delia Ferreira did. So he will be welcoming questions. So please think of questions and send them, because that's what he's proposing to do, to make it more of a discussion than a presentation. And so, and all our activities are on the website, on our excellent website. I find the calendar very, very useful. I look at it all the time, so I encourage you all to have a look at the calendar, find out what we're doing next. Okay. Yes, Kathy, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that the current affairs group that you just mentioned is going to be in 2 days on Thursday, and the information is so interesting. I think that some of us missed the sign up because we got confused with today. So if you'd still like to sign up, please do it to study groups. The reading is on our webpage, and it's so interesting.
Yes,
So
I haven't
please,
signed up yet, so I am planning on signing up. Yes,
the wires crossed, please sign up now.
yes, yeah. Sorry if I'm rushing, it's just because I'm worried
No,
that
no,
people
no,
would
no.
have to go. But, yeah. We would also like to thank Graciela for being the vice president. She's had to step down because of family reasons, but we really appreciate all that she's done for the club. So much appreciated. Barbara has offered to step in, so right now she's acting vice president. So this is a warning to many that moving to another continent
Doesn't help.
it does not mean the end of having to do work for the University Women's Club. So we're very, very thankful for Barbara and all that she's done for the club and what she continues to do as well. It's very, very much appreciated. Thank you, Barbara. So, and okay. I'm sorry I'm rushing. I'm just aware that some people may need to go. Finally, I just need to make an announcement about honorary members. We had spoken about this last meeting, I think, as well. But and it was written in the bulletin. But basically, now you can nominate honorary members. The guidelines will be in the bulletin, but most importantly, that it's an English-speaking person who has given extensive, effective service to the club. And you have up to the end of August to nominate an honorary member. Okay, and then finally, in our last board meeting that Barbara shared on the very last day of June, Kathleen Hall had mentioned that previously when we had our in-person meetings, people would come up to her or other people suggesting speakers or people to lead the study groups. And of course, now we don't have our in-person meetings, so this is not happening. But we would like to welcome your suggestions for speakers or leaders of study groups. So basically, I did not consult Litty on this, but I was just wondering if, or Kathy, but I was wondering that if you do have suggestions for speakers or activities in study groups, maybe you could send Kathleen or Litty an email, just saying who you're thinking of, what their expertise is, why you think they would be, why our members would find them interesting. I think Kathy would like to say something, right?
No, that's a thumbs up.
Yeah. So,
great idea.
So if you have any suggestions, I mean, the fact is, I think what I miss most from the quarantine, and I never imagined I would ever say this, is I miss the small talk sometimes. Usually I hated small talk, but now I'm starting to miss it. So, so just if you have any suggestions, please feel free to email us, but give us a bit more information. Don't just say, I think Mona Makramalla would make a good speaker. You know, well, what's her expertise? Why would our members find this interesting? Give us some rationale why you think this would be a good person. And what we will do is that in the board meeting, we will discuss those suggestions and we will kind of decide whether that person will make a better speaker or study group presenter. So just feel free to give us suggestions. And feel free to communicate in general with us. So I don't know, that's all I have really. I don't know if anyone else would like to say anything. Please raise your hand. Okay, all is well.
So,
okay, so I suppose we could move to adjourn. So yeah, I'm not sure how that works. I move to adjourn.
I think that Patricia.
No, you can't because you're president. I move to adjourn.
Okay, someone else moves to adjourn.
I second it.
Okay, so,
Patricia seconds it.
okay, so Barbara moved to adjourn and Patricia seconded. And yes.
I made the same mistake during my first meeting, you know.
But yeah, so I suppose the formal meeting is over, but we can still hang out if we want to. So you can unmute yourself if you want to, and we can.
Okay, you have to say all in favor of the adjournment. So in case
Okay,
there's
all
anything.
in favor of the adjournment, raise your hand,
Okay.
virtual hand or whatever hand. Okay.
Real
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah.